In this lecture, we want to review the article that talked about politics and nationalism in sport. So as we begin this, we have to ask the questions, why have Americans come to expect patriotic tributes before sporting events? Is it because it's something we've just always done, or does it have a deeper meaning? In all reality, could any of us even imagine going to an athletic contest without the national anthem being played? Now, the article you were required to read points out that most people look at the anthem as being something we do because it's patriotic. But if the anthem is not played, or if someone challenges the standard of the ritual, it suddenly becomes very political. The Colin Kaepernick situation actually got the President of the United States involved in the controversy. You can't get more political than that. So, as we look at the relationship between sport and politics, the article pointed out 5 specific relationships. How sport has been used by elected officials as a political resource, how sport has worked its way into the language of politics, how sport becomes a means of fostering national identity, how sport has dramatized the effects of globalization, and how sport has been used as a site of political resistance. Now, in this lecture, we're going to focus on relationships 1, 2, 3, and 5. We're not going to look at the effects of globalization. But before we start going into the contents of the article in review, let's look at a couple videos. And let's look at the fact that perhaps, is it possible that this has become too commercialized? So in the first video, let's look at why we stand for the flag.
Well, I stand for the flag, number one, because it represents the foundation of this country. It's the freedom and the independence, the self-reliance and the accountability. And this is one nation that was created under God.
I mean, it's freedom. It's home. It's every sacrifice that's been made by every man and woman that's fought to defend it.
America is freedom. You know, we have the opportunity to live free. You know, every time we go to a rodeo to compete, we get to stand for the flag and remember that.
The American flag has withstanded war after war after war. It's been tattered, it's been tested, and it truly stands as the greatest image of America.
I miss you too.
Well, there's a lot of people that didn't get to come home, that don't get to stand. Part of standing is standing for them.
There's graveyards all over the United States filled with men and women that didn't have that opportunity that we have, and we can't take it lightly.
No matter where the enemy takes them, foreign, domestic, it doesn't matter. They're willing to go through the hells that it takes to keep us free. And yet the only thing that we're asked to do to honor them is to stand up and honor the flag, you know, that they fought for.
I don't do it out of obligation. I don't do it because I'm told. I don't do it because I was trained. I don't do it to be bold. I stand for our national anthem because I'm forever grateful to be free. I stand for the anthem to respect those before me. We have wounded warriors who would return only if they could. Doing more for this country than any single person should. Stand up. Their lives were given for you. So as long as the Star-Spangled Banner yet wave, I stand for the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Well, there was a expression of patriotism by the professional rodeo. But let's look at another aspect of this. I think we all felt that patriotic pull as we watched that video. But let's take a look at this video that talks about the commercialization.
WBUR Radio in Boston, their excellent series, Only a Game. It's also material that Howard developed for his book, The Heritage, which we black athletes in divided America and the politics of patriotism. It's been far too long. We haven't had.
It's been a while, Bob.
All right. Well, speaking of a long time, it's been almost a full generation now since 9/11, and this is now you've got a whole generation, a whole group of fans who almost expect this at games.
It's what they know. It's what the thing, and I think one of the things that Bill Astori was saying in the piece was, now we have flags because that's what we do, and now we sing God Bless America because that's what we do. But after 17 years of this, I do think that the conversation, and I remember being in New York in 9/11, I was covering the Yankees, and what was a moment where you really did feel it. If you're part of this country, you felt that day and that month leading up through that World Series. But now it's become commercialized. In a lot of ways, it's weaponized because now you have a president out there, really challenging your Americanism and your patriotism if you challenge this. And now, in a lot of ways, you have veterans themselves say, I don't want to feel like a prop. I don't want to be commercialized. So you have something at one point 17 years ago that brought the country together, and now you have the same thing as it's been more and more and more ratcheted up. You question whether it's appropriate.
And it's also an industry because,
That's right.
as a congressional investigation showed, 2 or 3 years ago, a number of teams, at least 50, I believe, over the years, are receiving big money from the U.S. military, our tax dollars, for the right for these military operations to occur at the games.
And not telling you that these aren't organic. So you go to this ballpark and you're thinking, oh, isn't that great? The Red Sox or the Patriots or the Atlanta Falcons are out there and they're doing this organic display to say thank you for your service when actually they're being paid for it. That the Milwaukee Brewers actually charged the Wisconsin National Guard $49,000 to sing God Bless America. This is not patriotism. This is commercialism. And I think this is something that you look at and it's not harmless. It's something that I just think is inappropriate as well.
Yet, yes, you've got flyovers and you've got the undisclosed contracts, but you mentioned the All-Star game in your report for WBUR, and yes, there were a heavy military presence, but I got to tell you, seeing all those Medal of Honor men there, you could not have but have wet eyes on the lump of your throat looking at what these men, if you read each one of their medal testimonials, it's astonishing. And so finding the sweet spot between honoring people who from the greatest generation and this generation who need to be honored, and otherwise, that's a difficult proposition.
It's a balance, finding that balance. But the one thing you can't do is I don't think that you can monetize this the way it's been monetized with the camo hats and the camo jerseys and the alternate jerseys and even the players who come from military families. Sean Doolittle with the Washington Nationals was talking about the hats with the stars on the side. He says, wait a minute, if you come from a military family or if you've been in the military, you know those stars are earned.
Yeah.
You don't just put those on the sleeve or something. It's not right.
You have a fascinating quote from a gentleman that I think every American knows from post-Katrina.
From Katrina, yes.
Yeah, Russell Honore, at the time he was general of the Louisiana National Guard.
Yeah.
What did he tell you?
Well, I said to him when we were talking about this, and I said to him, I'm not sure I want my son being recruited just because he's watching the Red Sox. And I remember him saying, well, too bad, we're sorry about that. We need this to man the force. We're going to, you hold on to those little SOBs as long as you can, because if some kid at a Dallas Cowboys game sees an F-14 fly over and that motivates him to serve the country, so be it. We need to man the force, and we can't get this kind of advertising anywhere else.
And the ultimate irony, most of the times we talk about military and especially the NFL, it's about how players comport themselves.
That's
for
right.
the anthem and anything but. The other irony, if were teams to change, and pardon the use of this word, retreat from that position, how it would be perceived now, this current?
Now, the Red Sox official told me the reason why we don't do it is because we don't want to be the ones called unpatriotic.
Well, that kind of gives us a nice synopsis of really how polarized this subject has become in the United States. So let's dive a little deeper into this article. And the first step that we need to take is to differentiate between the terms politic and political. The author defines political as the unavoidable conflicts that are inherent in human relations, and politics, on the other hand, encompass the practices, discourse, and institutions in and through which we seek to address those conflicts and establish order. So we have used sport as a political resource for years. In 1971, we sent the American table tennis team to China to compete against the Chinese. And this was described as ping pong diplomacy. In this example, President Nixon recognized that sport could be a valuable resource in enhancing the relationship between the two countries. So let's watch a short video and look at this aspect of American history.
In 1949, shortly after World War II, the United States of America cut all ties from the People's Republic of China on the grounds that they would not associate themselves with communist countries. For decades, no Americans traveled to China, and there was no communication whatsoever.
In 1971, America feared the largely unknown communist giant.
Communist China seeks to spread its own brand of global revolution.
But that's when a long-haired American ping pong player missed his team bus in Japan and befriended the world's #1 Chinese player.
The American team, while traveling through Asia, was invited by Premiers Zhou and Lai to play against the Chinese team. That team was the first group of people in 20-odd years that had set foot in China.
Mao's offer conveyed the regards of the Chinese people to the American people. The televised tour showed the new, friendly face of China to the world.
I was so good that some years later, the Army decided I should be on the All-America ping pong team. We were the first Americans to visit the land of China in like a million years or something like that. Somebody said world peace was in our hands, but all I did was play ping pong.
In February of the next year, President Nixon took his own trip into China to meet with Mao Zedong. The two countries settled on an agreement known as the Shanghai Communique, which reestablished the friendship between the nations. Because of this trip, Nixon's popularity soared, and in 1972, he won re-election by a landslide.
So that basically gives us a little background of how we use sport in this instance to break a communication barrier that had existed for 2 decades. Now, while this ping pong diplomacy was seen as a positive use of sport as a political resource, the 1980 Summer Olympics resulted in a much different reaction. President Jimmy Carter declared that the United States would boycott the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow because of the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. And this presidential action was not received well at all. I well remember that era, and we were so concerned that this was so unfair to our athletes that had worked so hard to get to this point in their professional careers, or amateur careers, I should say, at that point. But we can go even further back in history to 1910, when William Howard Taft became the first president to throw the ceremonial first pitch of the baseball season. And this has a very special meaning because baseball has historically been referenced as our national pastime. And we have seen presidents since that point step onto the baseball field to make different types of messages or communication to Americans. We have seen sport used as a resource in wartime as well. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, the baseball commissioner asked President Roosevelt if the 1942 season should be suspended. Roosevelt responded that he felt it would be best for the country if baseball kept going. This communicated the president's belief that baseball was a venue to communicate strong messages about strength and community. So let's watch a short video about the president's green light letter to continue the season and the results of that.
Baseball played a major part in America during World War II. On January 15, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt issued his famous green light letter, giving baseball the go-ahead to play during the 1942 season and beyond. The president wrote that playing the baseball season would be best for the country. Baseball would lift America's morale while giving factory workers who were on 24-hour shifts a chance to see the games. Just as importantly, hearing baseball news gave the soldiers in Europe and the Pacific a chance to feel close to home. Due to the manpower shortage, the teams were composed of many players 18 years or younger, or over 40, but it was baseball. Hall of Fame first baseman Hank Greenberg served during the war, joining many fellow major leaguers. Broadcaster Hank Greenwald tells us about the post-war 1945 World Series, as well as a colorful description of the players who made up the teams during the war years.
Well, it was wide open for a new generation of players, in fact, several generations when you look at it, either guys who were under 18 or over 40. You know, they were not subject to the World War II draft, so they were available to play, and there were some ball players who, for whatever reasons physically, were unable to serve, and there were a few of them sprinkled in as well, but baseball, let's say, dropped a level or two during those years, but from a fan standpoint, they were just as intense about the playing of the game, and it was a great thing for morale during the war, as Franklin Roosevelt was wise enough to know in giving baseball the famous green light to go ahead, because he felt that it would be a great morale booster for all the people at home working in the factories, the war production factories, give them something to do in their off hours, as well as the soldiers overseas who would be kept abreast of what was going on through the sporting news. The Baseball Bible, which shipped thousands of copies to the servicemen overseas so that they could remain conversant with the state of the game. Greenberg was drafted to serve in 1941, before the war actually started in the Pacific. The war in Europe was on, although the United States was not in it at that point. But he put in his year. He was then discharged December 5th, coming back to the Tigers for the 42 season. But 2 days later, as you mentioned, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and the day after that, Greenberg re-enlisted. And so he was gone for another 3.5 years after that, missing a total of 4.5 years out of prime years in his career. Greenberg did get out of the service at the end of May that year, and he took June to get himself back into playing condition and played the second half of the season for the Tigers, and actually won the pennant on the last day of the season with a grand slam against the Browns that clinched first place for the Tigers. Now they go into the World Series. It was a World Series essentially of a lot of misfits, guys who were filling in, playing. Chuck Hostetler, who played for the Tigers, was over 40. Doc Kramer was at least close to that, if not more. And it was a World Series that John Carmichael, a sports writer, said, "I don't think either team can win." That was the famous line about the 45 World Series, which the Tigers ultimately did win in 7 games. An interesting thing about that World Series is that the visiting team won 5 of the 7 games, and they were still playing under the wartime travel restrictions, even though the war with Japan had ended a month earlier, and which meant that the first 3 games of that series were played in Detroit, and the last 4 were scheduled for Chicago and were needed.
The 1945 World Series matched the National League champion Chicago Cubs against the American League's Detroit Tigers. Detroit won the series in 7 games. Due to wartime travel restrictions, the series opened in Detroit for 3 games before moving to Chicago for the final 4. Hank Greenberg, he hit the only 2 home runs for the Tigers in the series while driving in 7. Baseball played a huge role during the war by maintaining an area of American life that reached across America, as well as to the battlegrounds of the Pacific and Europe. U.S. history, as seen through the eyes of baseball.
So there we see how we have used baseball as a resource in wartime. Now, we also want to look at sport and the language of politics and war. We've seen political leaders use sport metaphors for years, and the article related metaphors from horse racing, like front runner and long shot. We hear those all the time during political events like the primaries or the presidential elections. And football has also long served as a metaphorical base for the values of teamwork, unity, and respect for authority. But the author points out in the article that there's also a concern with the use of football metaphors, as football is also commonly used to describe the military and or war. Terms like in the trenches, blitzes, they've produced a seamless relationship between the game and warfare. And you might wonder, why is this even an issue? Well, the article does point out that using these type of sport metaphors really risk equating good citizenship with good fanship. Now, we also want to talk about sport and national identity. The term nation probably brings many thoughts to mind, but what does it really mean? Is it a landmass determined by its borders, or is it a collective community of like-minded individuals? We use this term rather loosely. In fact, we can also use it to describe an alliance of sport fans, the NDSU faithful, the Bison Nation. It can also be described as an imagined community, tied together by shared histories, myths, and ideology. Let's look at a direct quote from Rowe. He says, by imagining that America fosters a particular kind of community, a national identity begins to emerge. Sport is especially important in this process because its shared experience makes it one of the few institutions capable of developing a collective consciousness. So certainly we do take sport and we do relate it to our national identity. And then finally, sport and resistance. We are all aware of the Kaepernick kneeling issue, and we'll look more closely at that in a later lecture. But this isn't the first time the world of sport has seen an individual use sport as a platform to craft a message. We can look back to the 1940s when Jackie Robinson became the first African American to play Major League Baseball in the modern era. This was a movement in resistance to the social inequities of the time. Or how about in the 1960s when Muhammad Ali used his status as a boxer to resist racism and war when he refused to submit to the draft? Arthur Ashe used his celebrity as a tennis player to criticize the apartheid government of South Africa, and Billie Jean King did the same as she fought for women's equality. And as the author described, the signature image of protest came out of the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City, when the gold and bronze medalists in the 200 meters, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, used the medal ceremony to protest racial inequities in the United States by bowing their heads and raising fists clad in black gloves during the playing of the anthem. Now, as we look at this last event, I'm guessing many of you can see the similarities between what we're seeing today and what happened in 1968. Athletic activism is nothing new, but it went silent in later years as the electronic media expanded and we saw a huge rise in the monetary wealth that high-profile athletes experienced. We have seen athletes play for the money and not express themselves politically in this modern era. So, in conclusion, it should be clear that there is a clear connection between sport and politics. And as David Zirin points out, however you slice and dice it, politics are an enduring and constant historic presence in sport.